Hello and welcome. I'm Paterno Esmaquel and this is Rappler Talk. Is it time for the first Asian Pope? Let's talk about the conclave from our side of the world. We have with us Michel Chambon, the coordinator of the Initiative for Studies of Asian Catholics based in Singapore. He is a French theologian and social anthropologist, and he will help us understand the conclave from an Asian perspective. Welcome to Rappler Talk, Michel.
Thank you for having me.
Michel, let us begin. Before we go into the conclave, let us begin by looking at the data. Because it is very interesting to note that in this particular conclave, there are more Asian cardinals joining the papal election. So we have on our screen the data. So the 2005 conclave that elected Pope Benedict XVI, there were 9 cardinal electors from Asia. In the 2013 conclave that elected Pope Francis, there were 9. But in the 2025 conclave that will elect the successor of Pope Francis, we have 17. And when we combine that, the number of Asian cardinals with the number of African cardinals, who are also a growing force in the Catholic Church, it is really a big number. That is around 30%, if I'm not mistaken, in this particular conclave, Africa and Asia combined. Now, let's zero in on Asia. Michel, how do you make sense of these numbers?
Well, first of all, the numbers are even more impressive than that, because the conclave, or the election of the Pope, is almost a 3-week process. I know we like to focus on the kind of very mysterious election when the cardinals are locked. But since last week, and for 2 entire weeks at least, they meet up every day, all of them, and not just the electors, also those who pass the age. And so it's a collective assessment with all the cardinals. Every day they discuss topics relevant to the state of the Church and the state of global affairs. And in this collective effort to evaluate the situation, all the cardinals are together. So yes, only those below 80 will vote, and they could elect somebody older than 80. But in their collective discernment, their effort to listen to the Holy Spirit, all of them are part. So it's even more than the statistics that we mentioned earlier. That also shows how Asia is gaining a growing part, because Asia in general is also gaining a more powerful role in shaping world affairs. Asia has been able to cultivate very resilient traditions, religions, political systems. And if the Catholic Church wants to be truly universal, it has to deepen its conversation with those Asian traditions. So I think this is why we saw more and more cardinals in the Church.
You talked about Asia having a more powerful role now. Can you expound on that, Michel? What do you mean?
Well, we all know, of course, how Asia is an economic leader. We have massive population, massive economies that are flowing around the world. It's not just centered on Asia. We also saw, so at the economic level, inside the Catholic Church, we also see thousands, hundreds of thousands of Asian Catholics around the world. I'm French. The parish priest of my parents in central France, rural France, is Indian. My wife is from America, from central Kansas. Same. In her parish, there are three priests, and one of them is an Indian. So the role of Asian Catholics inside the church is gaining importance all around the world, not just in Asia. The role of Asia as a whole is gaining importance. And Asia, in terms of economy, in terms of religious diversity, in terms of political system, is unique in the world. And the church cannot ignore that, cannot dismiss this importance.
So being unique in the world, when placed in tandem with Africa, the African Cardinals, what does it mean for you, Michel?
Well, just to make it very simple, in terms of religious diversity, Africa is shaped by two main traditions, Islam and Christianity. Look at Asia. It's uncomparable. Then, if you look at, economic strength, again, Asia is becoming a leader, where Africa is still struggling to find its role and capacities. So I have deep respect. I'm not an expert on African societies. I've been working for the past 20 years on Asian societies. I have deep respect for African people, of course, but I do think that Asia has its own role in the ongoing making of global Catholicism.
In this ongoing making of global Catholicism, there is a rich history, and much of this history is Eurocentric, right, Michel?
Yes.
Can you give us a backgrounder, just to situate this in a historical context? How Eurocentric has the Church been over the past 2,000 years or 1,500 years, wherever we start accounting?
Well, I will say that in the Catholic world, we believe it's important to have a center. The problem for about 600 years, the center was not Rome, it was Europe, and it was even Western Europe, Portugal, Spain, then France, those big nations who became strong colonial powers. And so it was them and the rest of the world. So we were in a very binary relationship. Today, the Church has truly globalized and has a new experience of what it means to be a universal Church. Of course, we don't want to lose the power of having a strong center, or at least a clearly identified center, which is not Europe, it's Rome, and it's the Pope. And we have to make the clear distinction. But so in this dialogue of being a universal church, Asia is of course extremely important to bring all kinds of different flavors and traditions in dialogue with Rome.
And just for the background of our viewers, Rome is the center because it is the place where Saint Peter, the first Pope, considered the rock of the Church, was buried.
Yes, so after the death of Christ and the resurrection and the Pentecost, the apostles went into all directions, indeed, all. And quickly we had a huge diversity of Christians, a disciple of Christ, with internal tensions, cultural differences, because significant. Some people were inside the Roman Empire, some people were outside. Think about Armenia, think about Syria, think about the Persian Empire, Iran today, and even India. So you had Christians immediately from the first generation in India. So quickly enough, it was recognized that the church should be led by a group of few patriarchs, and with the agreement that the Patriarch of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, was one of the most important, one of the most. But then, after 1,000 years, he became some kind of the absolute emperor and unique center of everything. It became extremely strong, let's say, over the past centuries. Indeed, I like to say that the infallibility of the Pope in the late, the Pope was defined infallible in terms of dogma at the end of 19th century. And I like to say it was indeed a very deep French influence. It was a French mindset that emphasized so much on the center, on the power of the center and the role of the Pope. Because if you look in the long, long history of the Church, that has been never that simple. There was agreement to recognize a leading role of the successor of St. Peter in Rome, yes, but we have always had to rebalance, reconfigure his leadership, his role among others. And so today we are again 100 years after, 150 almost, after this super emphasis on the almighty power of the Pope. We see after Vatican II, so in the mid-60s, the church said, we need to rebalance that. It's not healthy for the church to be so centralized and indeed so Eurocentric. Of course, we need the Pope, we cannot lose that, but we need to make more room to all the Christians who are coming together around the only center, who is Christ himself.
So, given that there is this center in the Catholic Church, the supreme ruler on earth, which is the Pope, what does it mean for you to have an Asian Pope?
It will mean for me that, again, the Church is truly universal. So we recently had a Latin America Pope. I do think that there is a real possibility to welcome an Asian Pope, but he will be then the successor of Peter, here to serve the unity and the diversity of the Church. It will show how the Church is deepening its sense of universality. It's deepening its capacity to pay respect and engage with the richness of the Asian continent.
Or it would be breaking centuries of tradition, right? Or, although people would say
as a theologian, I don't like too much the term of breaking. In the Catholic world, we don't like to break so much, but I do think it's a natural development of the Church seeking more and more to embrace the entire humankind. It doesn't mean we want to recruit everybody. This belongs to the mystery of faith and the faith journey of every single person. But we want, as a church, to give thanks and gratitude and learn from the rich cultures and traditions around the globe that are all gifts from God. And Asia on that front is especially important. Having an Asian Pope will also signal this value that the Church recognizes to Asian civilization and societies.
Just a note, though, that there are commentators who say that there was an Asian Pope already in the past, and that was Saint Peter, right? Briefly, how would you comment on that?
Well, and not just in Peter, because we also had another one from Syria. So I will simply say it all depends how you define Asia. I tend to let the Middle East in its own world, personally. So when I look at Asia, I look what is beyond modern-day Iran. But some people still consider even Turkey as part of Asia, which personally I'm like, yes, why not? But it's not really my way to frame what we define as Asia.
Yeah, there are different conceptualizations of Asia, right? And
exactly.
So on that note, Michel, let's go now to the Asian cardinals in the conclave. We won't treat them like candidates in this case, like who is the front runner among the Asians, but I'd like us to talk about the cardinals, the Asian cardinals, as cardinals, whether within the conclave or even beyond the conclave, before and after the conclave, as a theologian and as a cultural anthropologist. Sorry, I misspoke a while ago. I said social anthropologist. As a cultural anthropologist who studies Asia and the church in Asia, who are the noteworthy Asian cardinals for you, the electors in the conclave, and why? Maybe just a few names.
So, of course, I have a few names in head. But before that, I want to say there is no candidates and there is no front runners. for the past 2 weeks, last week and this week, they're all together, discerning together what is the situation of the church, what is the situation of the world. And it's not an easy assessment and dialogue. And they have to come up with some kind of agreement. And depending on that, they may look for the proper profile, the one with the qualities. So you in the Philippines, you have the chance to have a few cardinals, and you know how all of them have their own strengths and weaknesses. We are all humans, no one is perfect, and sometimes a weaknesses, like being old, could be perceived as something valuable for today's church, for right now, in 2025, after Pope Francis. So they may certainly believe that it might be better to have a short papacy to give the time to everyone to breathe and digest the legacy of Francis, instead of going for a strong leader for a new round of reform and so on. So we don't know exactly which kind of assessment and discernment they are doing this week and last week, and that will define the kind of profile they want to look for. And therefore, every cardinal has the potential to become a pope. And sometimes just because of his weakness, sometimes because he's old, because we know he will not take any decision. He has not a strong leadership skill. Depending on their assessment, that can become qualities. It depends. We don't know what they're going to look for. But that assessment, again, it's all the cardinals together doing it, not just the electors. And when the electors goes into the chapel, not into a parliament, they goes into the chapel to pray and vote. Their vote is not to choose a pope. Their vote is to listen to the Holy Spirit, to recognize among them who the Pope is, because the Pope is already among them. But they ask the Holy Spirit to help them recognize and reveal him. So so that's why it's not just a political competition between parties and forces. It's a collective discernment assessment during 2 weeks. And then those under 80 vote to reveal who the Pope is.
So among the cardinals in the conclave and the cardinals you have watched so far in Asia, who are the most notable for you? Maybe 2 or 3 names.
3 names. Very simple. But no, there are a few more. But at least 3 names. Currently, the president of the Federation of Asian Bishops, Cardinal of Goa, and his 2 I forgot the exact term, but the secretaries, I think. So you have one Filipino cardinal that I think is a very, very inspiring figure, and one from Tokyo. So at least those 3 names, but there are a few others who have shown very interesting skills. Of course, so those 3 names at least immediately come to my mind. But of course, we all heard about different names of Asian cardinals. And again, I insist, all of them have their specific strengths and weaknesses, and all of them those features could be chances. We don't know.
Our Filipino viewers would be interested to know about your views of Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. And so as Manila Archbishop and also as Pro-Prefect of the Dicastery for Evangelization. How would you view the way he has exercised his roles in the church so far?
Well, I heard a lot about him. I personally, anyway, we all know that he was also the head of Caritas Internationalis, and that didn't end well. So we know there was a real problem of leadership, and especially in capacities to take decisions. Because as a leader, sometimes it depends, but you have to cut. And so it's clear that there are some doubts about that. Is he truly capable to take a strong stand and to make tough decisions when things get intense? So Caritas Internationalis, one thing. The other thing I've been working a lot to sex abuse and crimes and scandals related to French missionaries in Asia.
Yes.
Those files went to his desk in Rome because he's a pro-prefect for evangelization. He's the only structure that could have ordered a proper investigation, public investigation on what's going on among those French missionaries. Maybe he did it in private and secret, I don't know, but we never saw anything public from his office. So to me, that raised another concern. So that's one thing, yet also you have to consider his age. He's fairly young for a cardinal. If he is elected, he is likely to be a pope for 20 years. That's also something the cardinals will have to decide.
What are the positive attributes, in your view, of Cardinal Tagle?
Oh, so those are obvious and public. His capacity to be close and very kind and very approachable and very accessible to people, that's extremely precious. He has also very strong theological clarity and knowledge. He's very good at sharing these people. So those, yes, so you have tons of qualities, of course, and those have been largely discussed in public, I think, over the past few months now. And that's also explained why many people see him as a front runner, which I'm not totally comfortable with. But I think the cardinals do more than that. It's more about a general assessment of the situation and then to see who could be the right profile.
Do you agree with the assessment that he is the Asian Francis?
Francis was able to take tough decisions. So if you define Francis as being someone able to be close to people, humble, yes, of course. But Francis was more than that. He was a sharp leader. He was able to reform the church. He was able to enforce policies that were sometimes painful. So on that front, I'm not quite sure.
Speaking of Asian Francis, the legacy of Pope Francis, do you think we need another Pope Francis, or maybe a Pope Francis with modifications, or maybe someone exactly different? What kind of Pope do we need right now, in your view?
No matter what, the good news is that the church does not support cloning. So we're not going to have a same Francis. We may have a pope that will, no matter what, we will have to build on the legacy of Francis. And the next one will recycle some of these elements and add its own vibe, its own flavor, its own style. I personally really hope for Francis II, not in terms of cloning, but in terms of someone able to really close to the marginalized people, people that are left behind, someone able to show how the church is truly a field hospital caring for everyone. Someone who has the capacity to be clear about what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus. It's not just to protect, defend a faith and the truth that we are the only owner. No, it's to follow the example of Jesus, who has been able to question people around him all the time and to allow them, to empower them to move forward despite all their sin, despite all their fears. So I hope for this kind of Pope, and I do think that Pope Francis has been able to achieve a lot on this, and we will see which kind of next Pope we get.
Michel, just before we move on to the final part of the interview, I'd like to ask you about Cardinal Tagle and the China issue. Of course, that was also under his office, the dicastery for evangelization. He was a pro-prefect, one of the two pro-prefects at the dicastery for evangelization. How would you assess the way he has handled the China issue?
I think he did well, very well. I think under the leadership of Pope Francis, a few top leaders of the Vatican have been able to really reset dialogue and collaboration between the Church and China.
Michel, before you continue, can we give our viewers a backgrounder, a brief backgrounder of the China issue? So what are we talking about here?
Yeah, and just before that, we haven't mentioned that I'm an anthropologist of Chinese Christianity.
Yes.
So if there is one field of Christianity in Asia where I feel confident and I have first-hand experience for 20 years, it's Chinese Christianity. I speak 2 Chinese languages. I lived in Hong Kong, Taiwan, China for many years, so I try to keep myself up to date. So since the communist regime took office in Beijing in 1949, there was a competition, sometimes big conflict in terms of leadership of the church in China. And so the church was fully persecuted during the Maoist period, so in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Then the state decided to allow and control the church in the 80s, 90s. And so some Catholics agreed, some Catholics refused. That created a huge split. And the Vatican worked hard to try to negotiate with Beijing to say, we can work together, we don't have to compete, we could find common interests and concerns for the well-being of your Catholic citizens, but also for the well-being of how China can contribute to the common good beyond China, beyond Chinese borders. So anyway, but that didn't fully deliver until Pope Francis came to office. So for the past 12 years, we saw significant progress to the point that in 2018, there was a formal agreement between the two, a diplomatic agreement, not diplomatic relationships, not yet, but at least a clear agreement of how do we select bishops. And for the first time in history, China, the communist regime, recognized that a foreign entity, the Pope, has a right to say when it comes to the administration of Catholics in China. That was a significant departure from the past.
The past being
from the past 70 years.
China was the one that appointed
that
bishops,
wanted
right?
to appoint bishops all alone. Now they accept that they need to consult with the Pope. And so in this progress, Cardinal Tagle and most notably Cardinal Pietro Parolin has played a key role in reframing this engagement, Chinese engagement. And I think myself and many people are extremely thankful for this. Yet we saw also a lot of people who criticize that because they believe that China is evil and the Chinese communist regime is evil and we should not engage with it. Okay, so we saw dissensions among Catholics and beyond about shall the Vatican talk to China. Yet, the problem is that during the funerals of Pope Francis, almost a week ago, China did not send a delegation. Nothing. So, that, how to say, it's not a nice signal for those who have been responsible of these negotiations and this progress, because suddenly China cannot pay the most basic respect to Pope Francis.
The Vatican-China agreement was in 2018, right?
Correct.
But Cardinal Tagle entered the dicastery for evangelization in early 2020. What exactly was the role of the pro-prefect of the dicastery in this? At that time, he was a prefect of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples. It was restructured. It became the dicastery for evangelization, and he was the pro-prefect. What is the role of the pro-prefect in the Vatican-China agreement?
I'm not a Vatican official. I'm not part of this negotiation. What I've heard is that the team who has been able to create the agreement was extremely small and was mostly depending on the Secretary of State, not the Dicastery for Evangelization. However, it overlaps. So when the agreement was put in place, a few people were brought in to make sure that we're all on the same foot, just on the same approach with China. So for sure, Cardinal Tagle has been part of the development of the agreement and its implementation. We know that especially 2020, 2021, 2022, things were not going well. After 2022, the Vatican complained that China was not really following the spirit of the agreement. So we know that getting the agreement was one thing, but to keeping it alive and to make it work was another thing that every year it was a challenge. So even by coming in 2020, I do believe that Cardinal Tagle has played a role to make sure that we keep trying and we keep moving forward with China.
What is the role of the dicastery in China affairs exactly? Why is it under that dicastery, Michel?
So that's a kind of awkward thing of the Vatican currently. So that's still a leftover, in my view, a leftover from the Eurocentric world. But a part of the world, when it comes to bishop appointment, there is a dicastery for clergy that is in charge of this. But for the new world, for a big part of what seems to be new to Europeans, it's under the dicastery of evangelization. And so this new world covered entire Asia. And so usually it would be up to this dicastery to do the work on selecting bishops in China. But since China has been such an unpredictable environment, when Pope Francis came to office, he asked everybody to leave the room. He asked all the church leaders, head of religious organization, missionary congregations, people with a lot of expertise, even political figures from Asia, Catholic politicians with connections and suggestions and great insights. Pope Francis asked everybody leave the room. We need to clarify and to narrow down the voice of the Vatican to make sure that we know exactly what our absolute priorities are and to make sure that they are clear to Beijing. Because 12 years ago, there were too many different voices and it created a very unclear situation. So I'm saying this because simply to say that 12 years ago, it was probably only the Secretary of State that was in charge of resetting the dialogue with China. But when that was achieved, of course, the dicastery for evangelization was consulted and brought in.
As a cultural anthropologist who knows the Chinese psyche a lot, do you think the Chinese roots of Cardinal Tagle helped in resolving the China issue? Does it help in negotiations that he has Chinese ancestry? Or they don't care?
I try to not be racist. So I know some people are and care about those DNA aspects. I think the strength of Cardinal Tagle was really his gift to connect with people, to be very approachable and engaging. So I don't know if that from his Chinese ancestry. I can see how maybe for some Chinese people, it may bring some kind of more natural interest or trust, maybe, and yet I'm not sure because sometimes it can be perceived as a way to also try to pressure people more because you are one of us, so you should follow. So it depends. It can help and not help. But in this case, yes, I think at least fairly positive, being Archbishop of Manila, having so many Chinoy, in the Philippines, having this proximity, this experience with China, having so many Chinese people, clergy members coming to the Philippines for their training, for their theological training. So it creates a huge experience, of course, and that is extremely helpful to have an idea about how do we engage with China on behalf of the Vatican.
Winding down, Michel, this conversation of ours is taboo for a number of Catholics because they would say that the conclave is the work of the Holy Spirit. Let's not talk about it. Let's just pray because, politics has nothing to do with the conclave. It is a retreat. People pray. As someone who studies Catholicism, how would you address this school of thought?
I will say that the Holy Spirit is among all of us, working through all of us. We see that in the Bible constantly, that sometimes it's a woman who has been a sinner, like look in the First Testament. Anyway, nobody has ownership of the Holy Spirit. And we have been called as a synodal church to listen to each other more. And we saw that last week and this week with the congregation of the Cardinals, where the whole point is to listen to each other and we see daily reports from Vatican News giving details on their conversation, not all the minutes, but a real effort to engage the church. So what we are doing today, by trying to be respectful, engage, to put words on what's going on, this is not some kind of intrusion. This is not some kind of attack and disrespect. I think it's performing our duties as a baptized Catholic to care for the church and to listen and to speak up. To all of us, we have to take our responsibilities wherever we are. And in a synodal church, we cannot just assume that this election is some kind of magical thing happening. It is a collective conversation with very clear processes, allowing a small group of men at the end to vote and allow, yes, the Holy Spirit reveal who the Pope among us is. But it is the work of the entire church.
But what's the use of talking about it if we cannot vote in the conclave anyway?
It's, at least I think it's also very good for all people in the world, inside the church and beyond the church, to not take the church for some kind of mafia, for some kind of magical entity. We are not, I'm not going to give any example of what I consider as a mafia, but I think you can, or some kind of secret triad, or I don't know what similar things you have in the Philippines. But you see these kind of things. No, the church is a public, rational, reliable organization that we are all involved in. And by talking with this, we show that we engage and we give room to everybody.
Would you wish that the cardinal electors would hear analyses like this or read about it before the conclave?
Not really, because I'm sure all of them are way more knowledgeable than I am.
Yes, but the overall picture, I mean, of course, they do research as well, right? Before the conclave.
And they work together. They have experience in Asia. Or in Rome. They always have experience to work on different topics, issues, events, meetings. And so they have the opportunity to assess each other. They also have the opportunity to hear feedbacks about their colleagues and to know the different temper styles. So even me as an academic and through my network of colleagues in academia, it's not that hard to gather information about just Asian bishops and kind of know their styles, their preferences, their skills, And so, of course, the cardinals in Asia, in Asia and the rest of the world do that as well.
But most of all, to pray about it, right? Because, of course, it is a spiritual exercise. Now, my last question.
But yet, on prayer, I'm a theologian, and I want to insist. The real foundation of life is prayer for us Christians. It's very important. I try to pray every day. I think prayer is fundamental if we don't want to lose sight of the bigger picture and to not lose sight of what the meaning of our life, because it's not easy when you look at the crazy world we live in and all the violence and the disaster that submerge us. Yet, what is prayer? I dare to ask you, what is prayer? And we should all ask each other, what is prayer? Is it some kind of yoga meditation to find peace? Is it some kind of intellectual emulation to feel some warmth with Jesus? So we have to be careful about, when we talk about prayer, what are we talking about? And there is probably not just one magic solution of what prayer is. Prayer is to allow us to push ourselves, to make ourselves present to the one who is always present to us. But that we forget him. He never forgets us. And there is no one magical recipe to make ourselves present to him, who is already present to us. But that's my duty as a theologian, to really insist. Let's be careful about how we talk about prayer. And let's make sure we don't use prayer to silence and exclude people.
Fair point. My last question, Michel. Why do you think should Catholics pay attention to the church in Asia, whether there is a conclave or not?
Again, I think Asian people, Asian cultures, Asian societies, Asian religions, Asian political traditions are not evil. They are all gifts from God. They are not perfect, but they are gifts from God. Even Buddhism, even Taoism, they are gifts from God. And if we care about our Creator, our Father in heaven, we should learn to appreciate all the gifts and the richness of our world. And I think Asia, in terms of very rich diversity, huge population with so many different local traditions and beautiful things, deserve not only respect, but a real thankful attitude and approach.
Thank you very much, Michel Chambon. And we continue to watch the conclave. That was Michel Chambon of the Initiative for the Study of Asian Catholics. Please stay with us, follow our coverage, Pope Watch on Rappler. I'm Paterno Esmaquel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.